Welcome, everybody. This is Documental Healing the American States of Mind. I have a real treat for my audience today. I am here with Ryan Brown, who is a cowboy, but he's also the founder, the artistic director, and the conductor of Opera Lafayette, based in Washington, D.C., and his friend and colleague, both on horseback as well as a community musician. This is Lynn Lewis, who runs a ranch with her husband outside of Mancos, Colorado. Which, are you guys in the Rockies or the San Juans? Where are you actually located?
The La Platas.
The La Platas, okay.
Yeah, southwest part of the San Juans.
Oh, that's so beautiful there. So beautiful. So why are we speaking with a cowboy and a cowwoman on this series? And the reason is because thanks to COVID, well, also many of my audience members know that I'm a classical music critic, and I normally this would be the season, and I would be reviewing a lot of programs, including Opera Lafayette's version of The Blacksmith, which is a French comic opera. And that didn't happen. So instead, the Opera Lafayette took the opera to the cowboys directly and performed The Blacksmith on a ranch with the audience sitting on hay bales. And it's going to be streaming in November, so mid-November. And we'll definitely make sure that everybody gets access to the links and all of that sort of thing. But the reason I wanted to have Ryan and Lynn on the show was because there are so many overlaps between there's an intersection, I think, between opera and being a cowboy and American history and the sense of democracy, and also, as we've already been discussing with Tim Nelson from In Series, this idea that performance art can be a way for a community to have a ritual together, to heal something, to come together, to grow together. And you guys have already done that, and it went really well, apparently. So let's start there. Could you talk to us a little bit about what The Blacksmith is, and then how you adapted it for a ranch? And welcome, by the way.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Whitney. I should probably demur and say, I don't know that I mean, I've been coming here all my life, and my grandparents ran this place, but I may be a rancher. Whether I'm a cowboy, I'm not quite so sure.
Oh, no, okay.
I do work with the cows that are out in the field, but
I just put your estimation with people way up here. That's all right.
Right. I've got to bring down the expectations a little bit, but it is true that this is a huge part of my life and part of my identity, and as is being a musician. And this was the first opportunity, first time I've sort of combined those lives. And the reason I thought this was the time was because Opera Lafayette's done a lot of these what are called in France opera comiques, which are really musical theater. And the spirit of them in the 18th century was a reaction against the more longer, more complicated operas which were happening in Europe that were had their characters were historical figures or mythological figures, and people were getting tired of that, and it was getting stale. And so out of the fairs of Paris, out of the popular fairs in Paris, came this kind of this new form, which was essentially musical theater, where they'd string together stories and vignettes about regular people, blacksmiths, bakers, butchers, saddle makers, and they would put words to popular tunes and put together a story. And gradually, serious composers thought, this is great, I'll write all the music for it, and we'll still have the popular songs in between. And it got to be a dynamic form of opera and music, which eventually influenced people like Mozart and in his great operas later in the century. But the spirit of them is is so popular, and they're often based on rural themes. And so I thought, gosh, if we just instead of using the French folk songs, what if we insert American folk songs and we place it in a pre-automobile era, like the 1890s here, when this valley was really young. It was settled only by white folks in this 1870s. And so these characters, whether it be a blacksmith or who was also a veterinarian who also worked on people because he was the only doctor in town, that would have been sort of the situation in 1890. And so that's the kind of genesis of it as an introduction. But
so when you were planning to perform the blacksmith pre-COVID, were you planning to debut it in Mancos? How do you pronounce the town where you live? Mancos or Mancos?
Mancos.
Mancos. Okay.
We're going to do it. You want to tell them about where we're going to do it?
Yeah.
Well, Mancos has an opera house, historic opera house, and it's been recently renovated, and the new owners are trying to get a lot of activity going in there. And this was supposed to be the first one, I think, that they were going to have in the opera house. But with the COVID, we weren't allowed to have that many people in one closed-in area. So it had to be, if it was going to happen, it had to be out in the open.
COVID opened up other possibilities to do it in front of a barn and outside, and made it easier, I think, for some people to think about coming. Mm-hmm. Do you think so? Yeah. What do you think?
Here's how I'm hearing this is, first of all, it sounds like everyone had so much fun. And here's Lynn's participation in it was she was on stage as a guitarist. She was one of the people that you recruited in the community to be on stage and to help actually perform, because you didn't have all the musicians there with you. And you were using vernacular music as well, as you've indicated, so American folk songs and music that you would have grown up hearing out west and so forth. But you also had professional musicians and you had professional opera singers. So here's all this fun being performed by people who are professional at it. And if there's anything that I think opera singers and cowboys have in common is they're both superhuman, because the things that they are able to do are remarkable, and most of us couldn't do it or even conceive of doing it. So you have these people up on stage who are performing for people such as Lynn and her usual cohort of people who are ranchers and, horsewomen and so forth, who are not necessarily going to be exposed to this level of artistry, but everybody's having a good time. Nobody's isolated. Everybody understands it. They don't need a particular kind of education to benefit from the story. And everyone seems to have had some moment of collective joy. And this is kind of what I'm getting at, where I say that this is different than audiences in Washington would experience this. Everybody is, if you're human, you have a sense of joy, you have a sense of humor, you have access to these kinds of human experiences. But what I think you've achieved here, based on what I'm hearing, is this way of allowing people to actually participate without worrying that they're not going to get it right, or that they need to have done something first to prepare to come. No, this is, you show up, you are yourself, and this is about you and about your community. And this is, it sounds like in a way where you're laughing at yourselves as well. And everybody seems to have gone away with a really good spirit in their heart after having participated. And that's what I'm looking for as a way out of COVID with the performing arts, is that we not only break down that fourth wall, but we also break down the barriers to access to it in the first place. And I'm wondering how this might change the way you go about performances in the future as an opera company.
Well, does what she say resonate with you, do you think?
Yes, and I heard so many comments from the audience after every show. You've got to bring this back. Can you come back next year? We want to see. Mm-hmm. We want to see more. So everybody did like it.
And and of course I'm really curious how it's going to play in Washington and New York when we do get to do it live there. Um, I have high hopes that it's touching something that even if whether you're a banker in New York or a lawyer in Washington, that you'll recognize these basic human situations and instincts, and be able to laugh at yourself as well. And we've been so interested in Opera Lafayette and in finding, and we believed that looking at old music, if we really look at it and see how it was done when it was done 200, 300 years ago, whatever, that will come closest to the human spirit in it. And I think that there are obvious ways in which we've gotten away from that. People go to the opera and they have to read the surtitles. I mean, surtitles were a big thing when you finally got to see in English what they were singing in Italian, for instance. And that made opera more accessible. But actually doing it in English, we've still been resistant. And of course, the whole industry is such. At the Met, you hire an international cast. You can't ask them to speak it in English one day and then get hired in Sweden and sing it in Swedish the next day, and then get hired in Germany and sing it in German. So we've developed this by having, internationalized opera. We've also made it more distant,
right,
and a less immediate experience. So I don't know what this bodes for us. I think I have other projects which I think, at least one which I think could speak to this particular area. There are others which definitely speak to more urban situations. We kind of have to wait and see how we filmed this too, and so you'll get to see it. I also think that I'm hoping that it has legs in terms of, I would love to do a rural tour of America with this piece.
You said a rural tour.
Yeah, a tour in cities too. But I think that is a social. You talk about your show being healing, and I think that it has a social role to play to remind us of how similar we are. Because this valley is, like the whole country in many ways, there are different populations here. There's an older ranching population, and there's a kind of, younger, moved in recently, artistic, not younger necessarily, but newer, because many of them are retirees. And there's a culture clash there. And yet I hope that a project like this did show us how much we're the same rather than different. And so I think that getting back, that as you've said already, I think art has a place, has a place and a role, and has to find a way to do that. And I think we hit upon something here, and I'm hoping that it has resonance and it has legs, but we'll see.
Well, it sounds, one of the questions I had for you, and it sounds like you were leading there, is that is your community one that needed healing? Obviously, the United States right now is in turmoil, and we are at one another's throats, and I'm not telling you anything you don't know. So I have been looking for ways for us to get past that. And that's at the national level, and I don't know how that's going to happen, but probably at the little incremental level. So you have this beautiful valley that has been ranched by certain families for generations, including, well, both of your families. And then you have others that are moving in. You say retirees, probably people who are looking for the life they couldn't have while they were doing their 9 to 5. And now you're going to probably have things where you're fighting over water and you're fighting over, planning and zoning, and it's the way it goes. So can art?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head right there.
Yeah, so can something like this be the way that the side that says, no more development, this is where our cattle are going to be, and that's the way it's supposed to be because this is the Wild West, and that's that. And then the other side that says, but I don't want to live in Los Angeles anymore, and I do want to live out here, and I want to pretend to be a cowboy and wear a cowboy hat and wear my boots, and no judgment on that. It's a fun, romantic way to see yourself going off to the remaining decades of your life.
But do they understand?
But you're using the same resources. So does this type of event help those two sides meet in the middle?
Well, I don't want to claim too much for it. I think it gives people an opportunity to react to laugh at the same time at the same jokes, to maybe shed a tear at the same sense of loss or something, and I think that's as much as I would dare claim for it right now. I think once we once we start talking specifics, we may disagree, but about lots of things, and or the people within who came, might disagree about a lot of things. But you've hit, as Lynn said, you hit the nail on the head on water and zoning. And one of the things that actually the other opera that I have in mind addresses public land use in the 18th century France, and who has a right to be on what land when and where and hunt on it and stuff. And I don't know whether it's a project that could do what this did. It doesn't have the same folk songs and so I don't know. I have to think about it more, but it does hit on a hot button issue out here, and it's also about a forester. It's about a forester, and that's another big issue out here. Is how do you treat the forests? What do you do with the forests? You can as some of them say, you got. Actually, a logger told me recently. He said, well, yeah, you got fire, you got bugs, or you got loggers. Choose your poison. So I don't know, Lynn. You what do you think?
I feel like the audience that came for these shows was very happy, and it didn't matter about differences. They all were united in the enjoyment of the performance. And everybody that I saw and everybody I talked to, they were all smiles, and they were they were happy about what they were there for. And even on the last night, we had horrible wind and it was cold, and the dirt was blowing on you, and we couldn't keep our music stands up, but everybody that was there enjoyed the whole performance. And even afterwards, I was talking with some of the actors, and there was a smile on everybody's faces. So yeah, there's a unity there, and I would call it healing. Not that it's necessarily permanent, but it's the kind of thing we need.
Mm-hmm. Interesting that what you're saying, Ryan, is that these are topics that are, I wouldn't say eternal, because maybe we will stop as white Europeans looking at the land the way we look at it versus the way you said, before we began this interview, you made a mention that the Navajo who live on your farm or nearby needed to take care of some business, and you might have to run off to help them. And, they don't look at the land the way that you and the zoning and the water people and all of the fights that you're now having around those resources. They don't look at those traditionally. The Navajo and the other indigenous peoples wouldn't look at those the same way. So maybe one day we will have completely different ways of arguing with one another and, and then settling it. But what you were alluding to, though, is that opera does give us a community forum for dealing with problems in a way that is lighthearted, but matter. You know, what we do with our water and what we do with our land and how we feed ourselves and how we protect ourselves. These are all things that you're going to be dealing with if you're a rancher and if you're, you know, keeping your cattle safe from predators, and if you want the water to come to you and the other people say, no, we know we need it for the city or we need it for development or whatever. These are things that you can, it sounds like, deal with in an artistic way, and be creative with it, and maybe help. Do you think, anyway, before I tell you this is what it is, but it seems like it gives you an opportunity to show people the other side of what people are thinking.
I think, yes, I think that's right. And I think it's also, it's important to show that there's a third way, that it's not black and white, it's not red and blue, but there are other ways of thinking. And I'll just use your example to tell you a little story. We did another piece which takes place in Louisiana. It has an Indian princess and her Indian prince who wants to marry her, and then it has a Spaniard and a Frenchman, colonizers down in Louisiana way back when. And I tried to get Indian director involved in this. A little too late, dollar short and a day late, but nonetheless, she said something I'll never forget. I suggested, we've got this dance scene, and why don't we invert this? The story's sort of over, and the Indian prince and princess get together, and she rejects the Spaniard and the Frenchman. And so why don't we have her on each repeat of this melody? Why don't we have her say, all right, you two can have all that area. And then on the repeat say, well, no, maybe we'll give you that much area. And then on the repeat, oh, we'll give you that much. And then finally say, no, you just go in the corner there. And I thought, oh, that'd be funny, turn the tables on the colonizers. But this woman, this Native American woman, said, she just kind of, raised her eyebrows and said, well, no, I mean, why would I want to do that? We don't have a sense of private property and ownership.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, oh, I felt like that's small. Here I was going to be, fight the same battle in the same way, but turn the tables.
Mm-hmm.
But she was showing me that's not the issue. We all, and I think that when I think about this ranch, well, Well, I think of it as a gift that a lot of people have taken care of over the years. So
I think you've really you have elegantly framed why everybody is so passionate right now in our country about their side, and I'm putting aside the people who are just crazy and not willing to come to the table, but the passion is around values. And even though what I'm hearing you describe is about an attitude that goes back generations within the nation of, I'm not sure who the Native American woman was or what her nation was, but let's just say
wasn't out here, it was out east. But
maybe it was, I don't know, it doesn't matter. I won't know. So let's say that an indigenous person, their attitude goes back generations. We have the attitudes we have. They're just different. Ultimately, one, I don't think is sustainable. What we've done with our land is not sustainable. But that doesn't mean we don't love it. And that doesn't mean we don't care for it. And it doesn't mean that we haven't derived a soulful connection with it and had it help define us. I think the sad thing is that we probably have, as you clearly do with your family's ranch, but then we haven't had a system around us economically or politically to allow us to benefit from that connection in a way that is sustaining and that is enduring and that is regenerative. And I think that that's kind of where we are right, not kind of, it is where we are right now when it comes to this nation is we all have values and our values are meaningful, but the resources are finite. And so how do we meet our values head on with finite resources? What's next? And
well, I think, one of the things, I mean, you hear a lot, you'll read a lot on various signs about, how cattlemen overgrazed this land at one time. Well, the fact is, at one time may have been one thing, but today, any rancher worth his salt is thinking in terms of regenerative agriculture, whether or not he's using those words. He's got to use it the next year. It's got to be healthy the next year to keep using it, and to have a knee-jerk reaction and accuse cattlemen of not caring about the land, it just makes no sense, because they've got to come back next year,
Right.
and they want their kids to be able to do it. And so I think that it is, I think that, and yet, the biggest, we got a line, I gave a little introduction, and the biggest line of surprised me of applause I got for a couple of nights was that I said, and I've so-and-so, all these families have worked on this land, and of course it used to be Ute land and this, and I said, and now we've got into conservation easement. And of course, most of and we got a lot of people clapped, and because I think because they all appreciated that on some level. I mean, the fact is, there weren't as many cowboys as I would have liked in the audience. There were definitely some, but a lot of them were just too busy working, and probably couldn't believe that there was an opera. So I didn't know, but we definitely, there were a lot of old families here who, in addition to those newer people, and of course, some people say they're new if they've only been here 80 years, but that's I straddle that world myself. In that, when I was a kid and coming here, I didn't grow up all year. I just came here in the summers. But some of the local ranch kids would call me a city slicker, and so.
Well, let's talk about that. I'm very curious. Anyway, I didn't know that your family were cattle ranchers. I mean, I just know you as this very erudite, extremely accomplished musician and conductor and an arranger. You and Nick Olcott's work is very sophisticated, and I'm not saying that somebody from the mountains isn't going to be sophisticated or have sophisticated musical interests. But how did you get from here to there, from there to here?
Oh, well, my mother's side of the family is from out here, although my mother's a pianist. And my father's side of the family is out in Northern California. And I was raised during the year, went to school, grew up in Northern California, where my father conducted the local symphony orchestra. And my mother is a pianist, as I said, and I was out here every summer since I was born. And gradually I've spent more of my life as I've been able to. And I was, when my grandparents died, I and my mother and I were working the place. She, it was hard for her, and so I was the one in the family who stepped up and became the family manager of it, and tried to, keep it in the family and keep it going. And it's been, for me, it's been, both a sense of, I mean, obviously great spiritual nourishment on in many ways, but also it's you don't take some of the, if there's an out, you don't take some of the stuff so seriously in your, or you don't have to do the obvious popular thing to get approval in your other career. I think it helped me go a slightly different route in music. And also, I should say that my grandparents' role here in this community, similar to my parents in the community out in Northern California, was, and they were very well rooted in each of those communities, and I saw the value of that. And I don't think it's, some people would say big fish in small pond, but I think it's much more than that. It's relating to a community on lots of different levels in a way that is harder to do in the city. But obviously, hey, I went to New York, went to Juilliard, and could only do certain things and learn about certain things in music there. And when I went from New York to Washington, Washington seemed like a place that was conducive toward creating a group,
Mm-hmm.
and there's no way we could have paid for this project out here if it weren't for donors back east, and so we're hoping to bring it back to them soon and have them say, oh yeah, this is a really interesting project on a lot of levels. I mean, they already have, because they, voted with their goodwill and their generosity. But I'm eager to show it to them too.
Well, you have the unusual I don't know, benefit, I guess, of having the dual perspective of being somebody whose livelihood is of the land, and land that is fought over and is increasingly fought over because people want to get to it now. The West is dwindling, the Wild West, the true West is very small anymore because people show up, want to retire there, want to try their legs at being a cowboy, even though I think I'm not saying that judgmentally, but I am saying it slightly mockingly, because that's not the same thing. Showing up and just wanting to. That's like what I do. I show up and I want to pretend that I'm a cowgirl, and I ride, and then and I learn how to do all the tricks of the trade. But I'm not a cowgirl, and that's a totally different lifestyle. But we're showing up. We're moving out there. And so you are in the thick of that and trying to preserve a way of life. And then you have the East Coast, which is saying, whatever we're saying here on the East Coast, but it's much more focused on money and being the top dog, which I think really what I'm getting at is that you have the perspective of seeing both sides of the system that is harming us. And I'm wondering if after COVID, after seeing the success that you've had out there with the community where you are, and being so in touch with the beauty of the land and the necessity of its endurance and its preservation, do you think it's possible that what you're doing will help bring about a new perspective on that it's not that the American West romance is actually part of the system that's helping to ruin it? And is it possible that through a community sort of ritual such as the one that you've been performing, you can at least bring it back to the East Coast and say, we have to think about doing things differently? And do you think that your audience would be receptive, or are they just looking for entertainment? Because we do that here in Washington. We just go to the opera to be entertained a lot.
Well, for me, I've lived a lot of through art, and I think a lot of people, I think they do. I'm not sure about this overt political stuff. I mean, I've always said that music, people talk about the story but they're reacting to the music, because they don't know how to talk about the music. So.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, but there's no harm in that.
Right. But what's actually affecting them, and what they might talk about after performance, and what might seep in, I don't think we really know that, and for sure, and I don't know how to measure it. And you just kind of hope. I don't know, Lynn, do you have something? I don't know how what would your hope be for this piece and going east or anything?
Well, I think it would definitely present a different perspective and make some people, at least some people, consider changes and a change in attitude, change in thoughts. The disappointing part is it can't reach enough to make the big difference. You know what I mean? Like the people that are rioting and stuff, how can you reach them? But I think that it would have a very positive effect on the people that do see it?
So, it's you don't always want to. Sometimes you get too much of a self-selecting audience,
Yeah.
and yet, this was bringing something to a place that wouldn't have happened otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
People who wouldn't have been able to come to something like this otherwise. And I hope there's someone out there who would like to send it or something like it. It doesn't have to be us, but.
Well, I've been reading, in preparation for this, I read a couple of reviews and listened to some other audio interviews, and it seems like everyone is, or the theme is, oh, this is a novelty. This is so fun because it's unusual, and it is. But also, this is how things used to get carried to the West from the East. This is how the news came. This is how entertainment came. This is how trends came. Was every Western town, or with a population of 150 or so or more, had an opera house.
Yeah, yeah. And this one was 1910, and the one up in Telluride was 1880s. I remember, I played up there when it was all result of the silver boom, and you read about, for God's sakes, Oscar Wilde and other people coming out west, and Lily Langtry and all those and shows. And you were just talking about, what was it?
There's one in Tombstone. Well, they brought the musical. I don't know if they called it an opera, but they definitely performed plays and singing, and it was in a saloon hall, but they had a stage, and they had the chairs and up in the
There's one in Silver City at New Mexico. I'm hoping that we might do. It's like a bar too, and there's also my grandmother, she's Methodist. They had the Chautauquas. It wasn't just a place like in Western New York or on New Jersey Shore, but they sent them on the circuit. And as you know, so people got their lectures in addition to their entertainment from real people, who presumably, you ran into at the bar later that night or in the morning before they went to the next town. And it wasn't just a one-way feed the way, everybody's getting their news today.
Which I think, I don't think the digital age is not going away. This is the new world where we're doing this sort of interview on Zoom. But what you've just described and what you've already accomplished, I think, and even with Nick talking about breaking down the fourth wall, going back to the way it used to be, these forgotten things of how we used to be as communities that enabled us to be real with one another and to be in touch and to not be socially distanced, ironically, are being resurrected because we need to be socially distanced and we need to be small. And I'm really excited by the potentials of a global movement toward locality and being small and local, aided by digital technologies. And this is to me, I think, the leading edge of something bigger, and it possibly could change the way that we even govern and create policy, at least, in Mancos, where you guys are fighting over water and land.
I think it has to start just Silicon Valley, with whether or not I think it has to start bottom up rather than top down, even if you're using that new top down technology. I don't think, I guess that's my instinct, is that, and as I mentioned before, I've had these examples of people living a life in relation to their immediate community, and that's where you insist on decency and that's where that's where you have to meet, that's where you have to talk, and that's and I think this is I think it's where it's got to start. So there's a sense in which I believe in small, and how you make small, how you do that 1,000 points of light or whatever you want to call it, that's funny. I never thought of it, 1,000 points of light and it takes a village are both the same kind of thing from different walks, different ends of the political spectrum,
Mm-hmm.
But but I think, I think the quality of the experience that we've had, and that each of us who have taken part or been in the audience for, I think it's the depth of the experience which will last longer, I hope, than the fact that it was just a little bit of an experience for 10 times as many people.
Yeah.
I guess that's the way I kind of go at it.
Well, I don't have any other questions or comments on this. We just lost Lynn. Oh, okay. What you got there, Lynn?
Well, this is Ryan's grandfather. Can you see it okay?
That's perfect.
Yeah. He wore a cowboy hat. He was a veterinarian, and he was a rancher. And so, that's Ryan's background.
and the other side was a tenor and a businessman. So, but
see, that part I didn't know. So
I think that it's we all. I mean, even a number of people are that many you're yourself, what, 2 generations away from the West, and but I think that I've been a big believer that you don't live in your history, but it's the more it informs you, it's the more you're likely to be able to create the next stage with in a way that is creative in the best sense of the word.
Well, I think the way to wrap that up for me then is to say, we maybe don't live in our history, but certainly if we allow it, the history that lives in us can inform us about where we can go in the future. And the 1,000 points of light versus the it takes a village, one being Reagan's and one being Hillary Clinton's. I don't want to get too schmaltzy, but really it's two, we really are, even though we're in the extreme right now in this country, we really are, I think we're all very centrist. And I think Americans tend to just want to get along and be nice to each other generally. And we do understand that community is where things happen, and you have to look people in the eye. And so therefore you need to be accountable and be nice to one another and be respectable and be respectful. And again, I go back to that sense of optimism I have, that very beautiful and historically accurate things will result from what's happened after this year. This year has been difficult, to say the least, in so many ways for so many people. But having a conversation like this where we can say, well, what has happened in the past historically, and how do we review it in a way that makes it meaningful, and not have it be told to us, oh, in the old days, or this is what it used to be, but actually, no, this is how my family lived it. This is how your family lived it. This is how our community lived it. And what did we lose? Why did we lose it? And how can we bring it back? And so the idea of a traveling opera to the West and people thinking it's a novelty, it's only a novelty because we made it one. At one time, it wasn't a novelty. It was the way. And maybe sometimes we forget that we already have the solutions to the problems that we think are unsolvable.
And I think it's not nostalgia. It's allowing that tradition or history to inform the next step. Yeah. Well, I'm really happy to have this conversation with you, Whitney. Thank you.
I'm very delighted to have this conversation and to have also made your acquaintance, Lynn. And you said you're originally from Arizona. So when you were talking about Tombstone, I was like, oh, that's right. You're from Arizona. So you bring the perspective of the real deep West and then also the mountain West.
Well, I just love the West.
No, yeah, you're the one who keeps saying, what's your phrase?
It's a perfect day in paradise.
Perfect day in paradise. And and I remember another thing that Perry, your husband, says, no one in Mancos ever starved.
Yeah.
But basically it's because there's going to be somebody there for you.
Right. And that's the way it should be. Well, thank you so much. This was delightful, and I appreciate your candor, both of you, and of course, the opera itself is what made us connect. But I think the larger point to the conversation is that we have more in common than we think in terms of being American and wanting to do the things that we all want to do with finite resources. And I'm going to hang my hat on that.
Okay. All right. Good,
Thank you.
Good deal. Well, thank you, Whitney.